Heard through a half-open door, my daughter's voice cut cleaner than any blade. "Dad's house is dead money. We'll manage it for him." In 10 quiet seconds, 40 years of love buckled. I didn't storm in. I walked away, palms cold on the wood, and chose something harder than rage: proof. What followed was a war fought with documents, a single recording, and a father's decision to protect his dignity, even if it meant losing his only child. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back. Be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. The late sun poured through the shop window in a slant of copper light, turning the dust into slow, drifting constellations. I had been sanding a mesquite tabletop long enough to feel the grain like a heartbeat under my palms, each pass of paper smoothing the stubborn spots where the tree once fought for water. The old Timex on my wrist ticked like a calm metronome. Beside it lay my leather planner, creases like riverbeds where I'd circled tonight's engagement dinner in blue ink. I'd underlined the time twice. Being early settles the nerves, I'd written in the margin, the way a ranger marks wind direction before the first spark. 12 years had passed since Myra left this world without so much as a warning gust. Grief had rewritten my days into small, useful rituals. Sharpen the plane, sweep the floor, oil the hinges, keep moving. Her half-finished knit blanket still hung over the porch rocker, a quiet wave frozen in time. Her belt buckle, scratched silver with a turquoise cabochon, cinched my waist whenever the day felt heavier than the wood I carried. The shop walls held our life in faded squares, Lily with dusty knees at a trailhead, Myra squinting in July sun, me in a forest green uniform grinning like a man who believed seasons only rotated, never ended. Strength and weakness are twin edges of the same blade. Discipline and patience kept me alive in wildfire seasons, taught me to read the way smoke crawled and where a canyon turned wind into a knife. The same traits made it easy to avoid conflict at home, to mistake silence for peace. I had a habit of measuring love by labor, how many hours I put in, how many promises I kept, while telling myself that sacrifice, like a fire break, would always hold. I wiped the bench top until the cloth came up clean, labeled the finished pieces for delivery to a Canyon Road gallery, and capped the boiled linseed oil. Coffee waited in a dented thermos, strong enough to stand a spoon. I logged mileage for the drive downtown, neat columns, small victories of order. Outside, the adobe walls wore the day's warmth like a second skin. Viga beams cast long shadows. Somewhere a neighbor burned piñon. The smoke was sweet and old. Church bells carried a few notes on the dry air, and for a moment Santa Fe felt like a city paused between breath and memory. Lily existed for me in double exposure. In the first image, she was 8, hair escaping a braid, mud on her shins, asking for another push on the swing. In the second, she was 32, polished as a hotel lobby, the kind of woman who knew where to stand in photographs and when to hold back a laugh. Both were true. Most days I set an extra seat on the porch, a superstition I never named. She stopped by less as the years unspooled, and when she did, the seat made her fidget. I told myself it was the cushion, not the distance. I rehearsed a toast in my head while I polished the tabletop to a soft glow. Keep it short, Ethan. Pride, blessings, no stories that smell of dust. A father can love his daughter without turning love into a state. I knew the crowd would be different, sleek, quick to appraise, the sort who treat conversation like a sport with referees. My job was not to foul. Wardrobe for a man like me is a declaration. I pressed a plain denim shirt until the seams behaved and shined my scuffed boots until they quit arguing with the light. Myra's buckle clicked into place. Its cool weight steadied my breathing. I laid out a clean handkerchief, tucked the planner into my jacket pocket, then paused at the shop doorway. The sky was sliding toward red. There are moments when a house exhales, when you can almost hear the day loosen its grip on the earth. What I wanted tonight was elementary and unremarkable. A hug, a look that said I still belonged in her circle, no matter how wide it had grown. The fear was less noble, to be seated like a potted plant at the edge of her new life, watered occasionally, admired for being quiet. I had lost enough to know that most injuries arrive without ceremony. I told myself this was not one of those nights. I checked the planner again. The ink had bled a little from a spilled cup of coffee months ago, turning the underline to a tide mark. I said aloud, because I sometimes do, being early helps. The drawer of the workbench thumped shut under my hand. Papers inside slid against each other like cards, forms a daughter once asked me to sign, then left when I didn't. I didn't think about them now. I took the keys from the hook, breathed in the resin rising from the sanded mesquite, and flicked off the shop light. Outside, the Sangre de Cristo range held the last of the sun like coals nested in ash. I locked the back door and stood for a beat in that familiar hush that separates one life from the next. The truck door creaked as it always did. The dashboard woke with a tired green glow and a hiss of air through vents. Downtown's lights were already pricking the sky when I turned the wheel toward them, the tires humming a tune I knew by heart. A father learns to drive by landmarks, a mural on a brick wall, a crooked mailbox, a traffic light that's never in sync. I passed them the way a river passes stones, each one worn smooth by repetition. I thought of the rooftop where we'd gather, of glasses sweating on linen, of a breeze that might lift the edges of napkins and make everything feel a little less staged. "Don't make it harder for her," I said, the words small in the cab. Santa Fe slid past in panes of neon and adobe and dusk blue shadow. I felt hopeful and wary in equal measure, a coin spun and left to wobble. Most habits aren't virtues, they're rails. My habit of arriving early had kept me safe in 1,000 small ways. As I merged toward downtown, I didn't know it was about to tilt my world, not by inches but by miles. I drove on, steady as a plumb line, and the city opened ahead like a door I believed I could still walk through. The elevator chimed like a polite throat clearing, and a blade of evening air slid in as the doors parted. Citrus polish and hot lamp wires scented the corridor. Sunset dropped its last red rim on the glass, and the rooftop caught it like coals. A discreet placard at the hall's end bore Lily's initials entwined with Miles's. The serif letters stood straighter than I felt. Pride and Misfit walked beside me. Carpet swallowed my steps. Votive candles and glass sleeves fussed at passing currents. A private door sat ajar by 2 inches, a wedge of warm light spooling into the dim hall. I lifted my hand to knock, palm on wood that still held the day's heat. Then came Lily's laugh, that bell I'd known since she learned to bicycle. Familiar, but with an edge that added distance. A lower voice followed, smooth and managerial. "Have we sorted your dad?" Lily replied, steady and practical. "He's persuadable," as if my stubbornness were a minor habit. The quiet around those words rang harder than a shout. Efficiency, I learned in the forest, can be more lethal than rage. I didn't lean closer. I let the air bring me what it wanted. "The adobe is idle equity," the man said. "Clean collateral once we shift it into the LLC. Paperwork after the wedding keeps optics tidy." Acronyms and tidiness, the vocabulary of rearranging a life without touching it. Lily mentioned timelines and signing when he's in a good mood. and I pictured my signature as a hinge turned by someone else's hand. Phrases drifted like labels on boxes. Transition him. Supportive community in Albuquerque. Continuity of care. Then two words so light they almost escape notice. Doctor's note. Another followed like a shadow. Capacity. A ranger respects the exactness of language. You do not call a crown fire a surface blaze. Here language thinned me into a problem set. I wasn't struck by cruelty, I was stunned by calibration. My hand cooled on the wood. The grain under my palm felt like a map. I heard my pulse in my ear, a soft drum under the carpeted quiet. A nick in the doorframe held my eye. Name 3 things you see, 2 you hear, 1 you feel. Candle flame, brass hinge, shadow of a fern. Air conditioning hum, cutlery clink. Heat in the wood I'm touching. My breathing steadied. I pictured opening the door and stepping into the light, saying my daughter's name the way a father calls a child home. I saw Lily at 8, dirt mustache on a glass of milk, and I did not want to break that image with whatever would happen next. Pride sealed my mouth more than fear. I've made speeches to hillsides on fire and kept my hands from shaking. Doing so here felt like breaking a rule about wind. I let the knob go. The door stayed where it was, half invitation, half warning. I backed away on the carpet seam and found the service stairwell behind a lattice of palms. The metal rail smelled faintly of disinfectant. On the landing, a server practiced table numbers and didn't see me. The hallway lights stretched toward an evening that no longer had my name on it. In the lobby, I passed a knot of guests, making a kind of laughter that wants witnesses. Name tags flashed, jewelry glittered, and I threaded through on muscle memory. Outside, condenser units hummed. I crossed to the truck and slid into the cab. The small space gave me back my size. I shut the door gently as if noise might jar the fragile thing my thoughts had ripened into. For a minute, I did nothing. Doing nothing can be a skill. It lets shock settle where it belongs. The rooftop let go a burst of laughter that fell a few stories and broke on the sidewalk. I opened the planner in my lap. The circled time glowed like a target. Being early had bent a small fact into a large one. Habit had set the angle. Chance did the rest. I did not label this betrayal. The word would have made me theatrical, and I needed to be technical. This was proof, not climax, a data point to build from. Observe, then plan. The vow came without fanfare. Protect dignity first, love later. Love without dignity is a poorly cut join. It splits under pressure. I unlatched Myra's turquoise buckle and reclasped it, a ritual I didn't know I owned until now. The metal was cool, then warm, then mine. I set the gear into neutral and counted to 60 under my breath, the way we time a controlled burn's flare-ups. Enough room for oxygen to settle, enough time for flame to remember it isn't a god. When I shifted into drive, the rooftop lights stuttered across my windshield, a Morse I couldn't yet read. The party would proceed without the poor man who arrived early. I pulled away as I had arrived, unseen, and the city folded me back into its ordinary lanes. Somewhere above, a toast would be rehearsed, revised, and offered. Down below, I learned to say nothing that would make any of it easier to dismiss. I drove home without music, letting the engine be the only voice in the cab. The road unspooled through adobe and neon until the neighborhoods thinned, and my porch took me back like a habit. Inside, I turned on the small lamp over the kitchen sink. Its yellow circle made the room look staged for a careful photograph. The enamel kettle set just so, the tin of coffee angled toward the light, the wooden bowl holding 2 peaches that would never ripen at the same pace. The house sounded over-polite, the way guest rooms do when you know the guest isn't coming. I didn't wander or touch anything I didn't need. Ranger training says your hands tell your mind what to do next. I opened the pantry door and reached behind the sacks of flour to the cash tin I'd kept since the days of craft fairs and exact change. The key was on its frayed ribbon tucked into the lid. Inside lay a manila envelope with Lily's handwriting slanted across the front. Emergency forms. Easier for everyone. The paper weight felt like duty. A faint toner smell rose when I slid the stack onto the table. I set the envelope at a right angle to the table edge, a small command to the air, then breathed slow until my chest stopped acting like an alarm. Reading a legal document is not so different from walking a fire's edge. You look for where the language slopes down. You test where the wind wants to go. I flattened the first page with my palms. Durable power of attorney. The words sat there without apology. Subsections nested like burrows. Authority to manage accounts, to transfer real property, to act in my best interest. That last phrase carried more room than the house I sat in. I traced dates, underlined the name of a notary I didn't recognize, found signature lines waiting for my name the way a trail waits for a boot. A memory cut in without permission. Lily aligning a pen with the line while standing at this same table, her voice soft to keep me from bristling, the syllables smoothed like a concierge's. When I said I would read first, a flash of annoyance had crossed her face and vanished so fast it felt borrowed. Shame tried to rise, old and useless. I let it pass like smoke and returned to the line where the exceptions hid. The kettle took too long to boil, so I poured coffee from my thermos into a chipped mug. The sound of liquid filling space helped more than caffeine ever could. I opened my leather planner to a clean page and wrote in block letters, observations, not feelings, not guesses. I jotted the corridor's stained carpet, the 2-inch gap of door, the warmth of wood under my palm. I listed the phrases exactly as they came. Idle equity, LLC, collateral, after the wedding. Transition him, doctor's note, capacity. I wrote the time I'd arrived and the time I'd left, the way you mark the launch and landing of a flare. On the third line, my hand slowed. I added, voice steady, efficient. It mattered that cruelty hadn't been the point. The point had been logistics. I took my phone from the counter and scrolled to Hank. He answered on the second ring as if he'd been pacing the kitchen with a phone in his palm since supper. I told him the minimum and used the words as they were spoken. He didn't ask me to repeat. Don't move, he said. Write it all down. I'm coming. The call ended like an order on a fire line. 2 men used to cutting talk down to the bone. Night pressed its forehead against the window, watching without comment. I made 2 columns on the page, what I heard, what I can prove, and left the second side mostly blank. Silence for now was a tool. Confrontation would shorten the path but narrow the options. I sipped cooling coffee and listened for any sound that didn't belong to my house. The refrigerator motor started up. A truck passed far off on the county road. I recited the corridor again in my head like a map learned before a patrol. Hank's boots thudded on the porch and the screen door gave its familiar complaint. He didn't bother with greetings. He set his hat on the chair back and stood beside me so we looked at the same paragraph at the same time. The years had thickened him like a tree's heartwood, and his voice came up gravelly when he cursed under his breath at a clause that pretended to be kind. He tapped the page with a knuckle. That phrase will cut you if you don't hold it right. We didn't hug. Friendship at our age lives in the way 2 men share a margin without stepping on each other's boots. We worked the pages in quiet. When I slid out the last sheet, he asked if I'd called a lawyer. I said no. A gallery owner had once mentioned a name in passing, the kind of tip people offer you with a shrug when they think you'll never need it. I opened the top drawer of the sideboard and there, taped to the underside in case of leaky faucets and forgetfulness, waited a card. Ava Sandoval, Elder Financial Protection and Trusts. Hank nodded like a man who spotted a river in a dry country. That one. I lined up the documents, took photos with my phone, and composed an email that would make sense to someone who didn't know me at all. Facts, not grievances. The time I arrived, the time I left, the phrases I captured, a summary of this envelope's teeth. I attached the images and did what felt like the bravest act of the night. I pressed send. I followed it with a voicemail, my voice steady, leaving my number twice in case her pen hesitated. Hank poured coffee without asking and took the cup to the sink like a man handling a live coal. We didn't talk about whether Lily knew what she was doing or who had taught her to think of a father as a line item. We let the ink speak. He said he'd sleep in the chair if I wanted company. I told him I'd be all right. Both were true. Before dawn, my phone chimed with a tone I reserve for weather alerts. The subject line was clean, 9:30 a.m. Bring everything. Sign nothing. The speed steadied me more than comfort ever could. I wrote the appointment in the planner as if etching pressed hard enough for the impression to bite the page underneath. I stacked the manila envelope, the planner, and Myra's turquoise buckle in a tidy pile at the edge of the table. Past, record, spine. The workbench lamp clicked off with a small domestic authority. I sat in the armchair and let my eyes close without sleep in them, the way you rest between flare-ups, counting the breath, listening for the wind's next thought. When morning came, I would walk into a stranger's office not to be rescued, but to be briefed. Protect dignity first, love later. It looked severe, written in my own hand. It felt like the only rule that would hold. Ava's office sat one block off the plaza, adobe on the outside and clean lines within, as if a Pueblo had been taught to speak in straight sentences. She had printed my email, unpinned the staples so the pages could breathe, and listened like a person tuning a metronome to my voice. She asked for the hall's width, the gap of the door, the order of phrases. When I answered, she drew a precise timeline that refused blur. Then she set the perimeter, protect title, seal the will, shift banking, freeze credit, and write everything as if a judge might read it without patience. She examined the photographed power of attorney, pausing over the clause about acting in my best interest. We signed a trust that made the adobe mine for life, but no one else's after. The deed transfer took the thump of a notary stamp like a latch dropping. A pared-down will routed whatever remained to a small scholarship for forestry students who learned to respect fire the way rangers do. Hygiene came next. We froze my credit at the bureaus, set bank alerts, changed passwords I had left old out of habit, and removed Lily from every emergency contact line at financial institutions. Confirmation letters stacked in a neat drift whose cheerful logos did not match their gravity. Paper by paper, the perimeter thickened. Evidence, Ava said, has manners. She opened a spiral notebook and block-printed chain of custody on the cover. Timestamps, file names, originals in one place, read-only copy somewhere else. Facts before feelings. She slid the notebook across and held my eyes until I nodded the way a new crew member nods at a fire shelter drill. We mapped the kitchen as if it might soon be a scene. She recommended a small audio recorder under the counter lip, placed where air stays still. A lighter that was also a camera could sit on the spice shelf, ordinary enough to disappear. You do not lure, she told me. Ask open questions and let people choose their words. Hank, posted in the doorway like an old juniper, grunted assent without crossing the threshold. I wanted to test the silence with a message to Lily, anything that could sort plan from performance. We wrote communication rules instead. Reply only to logistics, never emotion. Leave silences unfilled. Do not show my hand because discomfort is loud. Ava would be the place where facts went. I was to keep both streams separate. The phone rang as if on cue. A clinic receptionist, bright and efficient, confirmed a cognitive evaluation scheduled in my name by Lily 2 days before the party. I repeated the time and her name so Ava could note both. Ava's expression changed the way mountains sharpen when a cloud slides off them. Guardianship attempts often begin with a cheerful note about capacity, she said. Then she added, calm as a ranger briefing, we'll meet medicine with medicine. We built a countermeasure on the spot. I would record the clinic encounter where lawful and state that I was doing so. I would bring field notebooks to demonstrate orientation and executive function in the wild. Then I would immediately book an independent evaluation at the state hospital's geriatric unit for neutral testing in the same week. 2 reports, one uninvited and one unimpeachable, would prevent anyone from painting me with their brush alone. Before I left, Ava ran a 2-minute cognitive drill. Date and place. 3-word recall. Serial 7s. She reframed my ranger habits as assets the court respects. Fidelity to timeline, concise observation, composure when heat rises. These are not just virtues, she said, closing the file. They're admissible. On the way home, I stopped at a neighborhood electronics shop. A teenager with a ring through one eyebrow sold me 4, 2 tiny recorders and a lighter camera nested in squeaky foam. He showed me where to tape the mic holes so the sound would not turn into pocket thunder. Good for lectures, he said. I nodded and paid cash. In the kitchen, I mounted one recorder under the counter with reusable putty, then stood in the spot where Lily usually leaned and talked about menus and weather. I tested the waveform on a trial file and practiced speaking at the volume a polite house uses when it does not want neighbors to listen. The lighter joined cumin and cinnamon on the shelf, a citizen of every day. I rehearsed the protocol the way we used to practice shelter deployment on a windy ridge. I wrote an entry in the notebook with date and exact start time, photographed the recorder in place with a ruler for scale, and saved a copy of the image to a flash drive marked in red tape. I created a folder on the kitchen laptop using a clear convention. Year, month, day, plus 2 nouns, nothing cute. In the margin, I listed who knew what. Ava knew everything, Hank knew enough, Lily knew nothing. The access plan was as strict as a trail closure sign. Then I sat and wrote. I documented the clinic call with time, caller's name, and exact phrasing. I called the state hospital and after 2 transfers, secured an appointment for an independent assessment. I wrote the confirmation number twice and printed the email, filing it by date. The house settled as night returned the rooms to themselves. I stacked the trust binder, the will receipt, the credit freeze letters, and the chain of custody notebook in an order that made sense to my hands. I fastened Myra's turquoise buckle and let its cool insistence settle me. The rooms had not changed, the perimeter had. Tomorrow would test my mind beneath a clock that ticks on a linoleum wall. Tonight I had a plan precise enough to read in the dark. If you're still watching and feeling the pressure build, type 1 to let me know. Hold on, the line between love and leverage is about to snap. I arrived at the clinic 20 minutes early and wrote the exact time in the chain of custody notebook. Block letters steady as fence posts. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and old magazines. A TV on mute showed mountain weather graphics marching past the screen like ants who knew their route. At check-in, I stated politely and without drama that I would record my own answers for memory accuracy. The receptionist nodded as if I'd asked for a receipt. She made a note on the chart and pointed me to a chair. I logged her first name, the badge number, and the color of her nail polish because details anchor the mind when other people want to tug it loose. The doctor called me in on the dot. His office had 2 degrees of neatness, books alphabetized, pens aligned, and the careful friendliness of a man who has seen quarrels dressed as families. He asked date, season, city, floor. I answered without reaching. He gave me 3 words to recall later, then asked for serial 7s. Numbers have a gait. Once your ear finds it, you can walk them for miles. I described a rescue I'd led outside Tres Piedras years back anchoring my recalling to a GPS coordinate and a wind shift that almost took our line. He watched more than he wrote. Draw a clock at 10 past 11. The circle came out true, the hands obedient. I did not try to impress him. Men who overperform for clipboards end up in notes underlining their own names. I asked for copies of any forms that allowed my daughter to book the appointment. He said the request came in as family assistance, no signatures attached. That mattered. I recorded the start and stop time on the page and the name printed on his badge. When we finished, he said the report would be ready in 48 to 72 hours. We'll send it to you directly, he added, a sentence that felt like air returning to a room. Outside, I photographed the entrance sign with the timestamp visible in the corner of the screen, then emailed Ava 5 words and 2 attachments. Visit completed, recording captured, awaiting report. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed. Hank had texted a screenshot that looked like a door left ajar, a Pacer docket header with Miles's name attached to a civil fraud case in Texas, closed by confidential settlement. The caption said enough without the sealed pages. Investor funds, misrepresentation, resolution without admission. Motive tilts a story from rumor to structure. I printed the docket number in the notebook, boxed it, and added one line, house equals clean collateral for dirty past. At home, I reset the terrain. The pocket recorder charged. The lighter cam blinked once, then steadied, its tiny lens pointed toward the stool where Lily usually perched to talk about menus or deadlines. I placed a photo box on the table of family while Lily, written in Myra's careful cursive from years ago. No bait, just an honest object with gravity. I wrote a text in the tone of a calendar reminder. Found old photos might help your slideshow. Stop by if you want. Lily's reply arrived within a minute. She could swing by between vendor calls, 10 minutes tops. I logged the outgoing and incoming messages as if they were helicopter launches. Time, purpose, outcome, unknown. Before she arrived, I rinsed Myra's cups and set them on the table like a small proof of lineage. I started the pocket recorder with the ritual of a man lighting a stove. The lighter cam watched without accusation. When the door opened, Lily came in with the smell of hotel air conditioning clinging to her blazer. She glanced at the photo box and set her phone face down as if she'd meant to do that all along. I poured tea. We sat. I asked questions the way you open a map, broad, no arrows. What's the plan after the wedding for you two? I kept my voice level with the rim of the cup. She exhaled the way busy people do when they've compressed a story to its essentials and are relieved to recite it. They'd sell the Adobe. Dead money, she said, almost kindly. Seed Miles's spa venture so the momentum didn't stall, and get me settled in a supportive community in Albuquerque where I'd have rides and nurses and friends my age. She promised visits when we can. She said a doctor's note would make everything clean and a capacity checklist would save headaches later. Each phrase settled onto the recorder like ash that will one day prove a fire. I didn't steer. I asked what would that paperwork look like. Lily's eyes flicked to the edge of the table where the old envelope had once rested. She said we could use cleaner versions after the honeymoon, that she had templates so I wouldn't have to deal with confusing language. We'll manage it for you, she added, an assurance meant to soothe. I wrote her cadence in my head the way a line boss memorizes the wind's new sound. No more than 6 sentences passed between us that would look like dialogue if written down. The rest was Lily arranging furniture in a room that used to be mine. She took a handful of copied photos, including one where she's 8 and grinning, teeth too big for her mouth, sunlight making a crown of flyaway hair. At the door, she said she was proud of me for being so reasonable. I nodded as if the word fit. I waited 60 seconds after the latch caught, the length of a small prayer, then stopped the recorder. The chain of custody notebook opened under my hand like a well-trained dog. Date, time, participants, file name, device ID, storage path. I backed up the audio and video to a read-only drive wrapped in red tape, labeled the envelope with the kind of printing a judge can read without squinting, and sent Ava a clipped email. Primary admission captured. References, POA, sale facility capacity, PACER. Link Miles, see attached. The house returned to its ordinary noises, the fridge ticking, a car passing, the wind fingering the eaves. I laid 3 things on the table and squared their corners. The clinic card with my follow-up window, the docket number in Hank's text written onto paper, and the photograph of Lily in pigtails holding up a trout too small to keep. I didn't look for lessons in the arrangement. I breathed once and felt something in me harden to the right shape. Not bitterness, not triumph, resolve cooling to steel. For the first time since the rooftop, the future had a playback button and a plan for where to press it. I reached the venue an hour early, the way a man arrives at a burn line he's carved in his mind all afternoon. The AV tech, a kid with neat hair and a coil of cables at his hip, met me near the service door. Ava had spoken to him already. His clipboard held my name in square print. I handed him a thumb drive labeled with date, time, and the word admissions. He slid it into the console, pushed a fader, and let a bar of green flicker to the rhythm of Lily's voice saying the word capacity. We tested volume low, high, then back to a level that would cut through glass and pride without ripping the room. He called me sir. I thanked him and wrote his name and the test times into the notebook in my pocket, the one that has steadied my hands through long nights of fax. The event coordinator moved like a metronome in heels, counting tables by muscle memory. I asked her to place me after the maid of honor, but before dessert, the part of a meal when attention tightens and exits feel inconvenient. She tapped her card deck, nodded, and penciled me between 2 toasts. Hank found a chair 3 tables back and gave me a single look, the freight of which was "You're aimed right." In a quiet corner near the coat rack, I ran Ava's 2-minute drill. Date, city, floor, the name of the mountain range visible from the south windows. Serial 7s until the numbers thinned to air. I picked 3 words from the evening, glass, boundary, ash, and let them fall through my head the way a ranger drops markers on a trail he'll need to retrace in the dark. Tone would be the difference between witness and spectacle. I kept my voice where it belongs. Spare, factual, unarguable. The room filled the way a story does, edges first, then center. Collier relatives moved like professional weather across the carpet, smiling narrowly at whomever a smile could help. The younger guests buzzed, half attention on each other, half on their phones. Servers balanced trays, the perfume of charred citrus ghosting behind them. Lily, radiant and exact, took a tour of the room with a hand at Miles's elbow, as if arranging a tableau. He wore ease like a shirt pressed an hour earlier. I made no enemies in my head and took no allies I hadn't earned. I logged faces without judgment, a habit that has never betrayed me. I reclasped Myra's turquoise buckle until the click placed itself against my spine. The clear sleeve holding the POA clauses sat flat in my inside pocket. The clinic appointment card felt like a chip of ice behind it. The Pacer docket print, yellow highlight on the caption, was a small, heavy rectangle against my heart. I touched the planner's margin where I'd once written, "Being early settles the nerves," and found the words had matured into instruction. The toasts began. The best man joked about Miles's impeccable hair and late-night spreadsheets. Laughter rose and settled, obedient to custom. The maid of honor made a tidy circle around Lily's kindness and her way with crises. Glasses lifted. I stood when the MC called my name with that practiced neutral warmth. I walked at an unhurried pace, a man crossing a room he has measured with his eyes. At the mic, I planted both feet and thanked the staff first, a wire to ground the charge. I said I would be brief and that what I had to say was for the record. Pride requires fewer words than pain, so I gave it 2 sentences. A daughter who learned trails before street names, a father who learned from her that love can be a direction as much as a feeling. Then I pivoted where the map said turn. Rangers learn that love without boundaries is fuel, I said. In recent weeks, some paperwork reached my kitchen that would have reclassified me as collateral. The sleeve came out like a clean blade. I read only the operative clause, authority to transfer real property in best interest, and set the pages on the lectern where a camera could see them and a lawyer could not mishear them. I held up the clinic card. I said a capacity assessment had been scheduled by someone else. I completed it today, recorded my own answers lawfully, and the report would come to me directly. I placed the card next to the clause as if laying 2 rails side by side. I lifted my hand palm out to the AV tech. The room obeyed the gesture with a hush that felt like altitude. Lily's voice came through the speakers with the unforced cadence of a person telling the truth to herself. Dead money, doctor's note, capacity, supportive community, we'll manage it for you. No commentary, no glue, just the phrases in the order the days had given them to me. I did not look at Lily. I watched the room receive sound like weather. When the clip ended, I placed the pacer print on the lectern, my finger resting on the highlighted caption long enough for the lenses to focus. Public records show prior civil allegations involving Miles resolved by settlement, I said. I did not add an adjective. I did not speculate. I set the paper down the way a man sets down a weight he has carried to prove he could. My last line had been chosen for its shape, not its heat. My home is lawfully protected, and so is my capacity to decide my life. I thanked the guests for their patience and returned the microphone to the stand. On the walk back, I kept my eyes forward, as a man ought when a canyon drops off to one side. In my jacket, the pocket recorder hummed insurance against memory's bias. It would capture the room's first exhale, the words people cannot help letting go of when the script fails. Silence held for a full beat, maybe 2. Somewhere a fork tapped a plate, one small bell ringing time back into the room. A collier aunt rose and bent to speak to another. Their chairs made careful noises. The MC shuffled cards looking for a next that no longer fit. A server paused with a tray tilted just enough to show his hands had gone damp. I sat, placed both palms on my knees to keep them from broadcasting anything my face would not, and wrote the time of conclusion in my notebook. Across the linen, a glass caught a tremor of the city and sent it back as a jitter of light. The truth had altitude now, witnesses and sound, and a paper spine. I felt the floor under my shoes and the thin, cold relief a man feels when the wind finally declares itself. Consequences would arrive in their order. My part, the choosing, the telling, the record, was done. Silence held like a pane of glass after I sat down, clear, brittle, and showing everyone to themselves. A collier aunt rose without scraping her chair and shepherded 2 elders toward the exit, her hand light on their elbows as if guiding them across a street where the light never changes. Miles's parents leaned toward each other with the expressions of people drafting a press release in their heads. The MC palmed the mic switch and stared at his stack of cards as though one might sprout a new speech. Lily half stood, then settled, mouth set, eyes unmoored. I wrote the time of conclusion in my notebook. My pocket recorder hummed, capturing the stray shrapnel words that leak in moments like this. Lawyer, optics. Who cleared AV? Hank appeared at my shoulder, then pretended to be a man on his way to the restroom. We took the service stairwell down, steps ringing in the hollow shaft. In the eye contact that passes for triage between old friends, he checked my pulse and color. You good? He asked, voice low enough to vanish between landings. Good enough, I said. We decided there would be no postgame. Chain of custody first. Commentary never. At the curb we split, he toward his truck, me toward mine, both of us moving like men who know heat lingers even after flame. Driving with the windows cracked, I let night air scrape the static from my thoughts. The city went by in panels, neon, adobe, shadow, and in each pane I felt the new shape of things catching up to me. At home, I put the kettle on and laid the evening out on the kitchen table as if it were a map. The clear sleeve with the clauses, the clinic card, the highlighted docket number, the thumb drive labeled admissions. I made 2 read-only copies to separate drives wrapped in red tape, then sealed the master in an envelope and blocked the flap with my palm until the glue held. The chain of custody got a clean entry, what, when, who saw, where files live, with no adjectives to invite argument. Tea steamed in Myra's cup. My hands were steady, my heart was sore. A form text dinged from an unfamiliar number. On behalf of the Collier family, further joint celebrations were suspended pending clarification. I screenshotted, saved, logged, and let the message sit where it belonged. In a file, not in my blood. The distance had begun, formally, politely, irrevocably. Then Lily, calls stacked, then texts, a staccato that changed key every few minutes. How could you? You humiliated me. We could have handled this. Please call. You didn't have to destroy everything. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb and forwarded the thread to Ava with a one-line subject. Post-event outreach, no response. I wrote the times into the notebook like weather readings. I chose absence over debate. A man can lose a case he's already won by arguing against echoes. Near midnight, Hank sent a screenshot. A local blogger had posted a 20-second clip that began with me holding papers and cut before the audio admissions. The caption read, "Father crashes engagement toast." Comments swarmed like wasps around a dropped soda. I logged the link, saved the page, and did nothing. It is a discipline to let a half-truth sit unchallenged when your proof has a fuse of its own. By morning, the fuse reached its charge. The full board feed video appeared on a news site, stamped with time and camera angle. The audio played clean. Ava had arranged the release with the venue the day before, a safety valve in case the room's story tried to eat the facts. Hashtags turned like a tide. Hashtag respect your elders bobbing at the crest. The blogger posted a correction that called itself context. I saved those too and still said nothing. Signals of implosion began to blink. A short statement from Miles said he was stepping back for family reasons. A hotel PR note distanced Lily's employer from private family matters, the corporate equivalent of closing a door softly and locking it from the inside. I printed both, highlighted the dates, and filed them behind the docket page as if arranging samples for a lab. Midday, I sat across from Ava with the relief of a man who knows a fire line has held through the first wind shift. Perimeter intact, she said. No contact with parties or their counsel. Prepare a statement only if absolutely required. One sentence, no adjectives, no speculation. The state hospital's cognitive report was expected within 48 hours. Her prediction was within normal limits. Facts, not feelings, would do the lifting. I left with my documents squared, my next step small, and my breath slightly longer than yesterday's. Home again, emptiness met me at the door like an old dog, familiar, patient, undeserving of blame. Grief and relief pulled up the same chair and decided to share it. I swept the shop floor in slow strokes, coaxing a neat ridge of sawdust along the baseboard. The broom's soft rasp steadied me. I oiled the handle of a mallet until the wood drank its fill and shone. I let the picture of Lily at 8 walk into the same room as the recording of her voice and did not force either one to leave. Two truths can touch without burning if you keep your hands still. Practical mercy presented itself in a stack of bills and a gallery invoice to approve. I paid what was due, scheduled a delivery of 3 mesquite stools, and set a reminder to change the door code and mailbox lock. Quiet hygiene, not paranoia. I added a note to check the batteries on the recorders, then closed the notebook so the line would not lengthen into a life. By late afternoon, the phone had settled into a posture of waiting. I reclasped Myra's buckle, the comfort of a click traveling the familiar route up my spine. In the chain of custody, I wrote one line that was truer than any speech. Truth published, perimeter holds, no statements. I placed the pen across the top margin parallel to the edge, order for its own small sake. The house exhaled. Outside, the Sangre de Cristo dimmed from iron to violet. I turned the phone face down and let the silence be earned for once, not imposed. What comes next will arrive in its order. Tonight, the job is to hold still enough to hear it. Ava blocked out 10 minutes and we used 9. Her office felt like a map room, quiet, gridded, north always marked. We sat on the same side of the table, not across from each other, a small geometry that kept my breath even. She clicked through her checklist. Trust recorded, deed transferred, will sealed. I've prepared an injunction packet, she said, tapping a folder with its tabs already labeled. If undue influence resumes, we file the same day. She updated the trust to name a backup trustee who was neither family nor Hank, an accountant in Taos known for making numbers behave. It reduces personality risk, she said. I nodded. She slid across a single sheet with one sentence in a large, readable font. Our public statement template, if it ever became unavoidable. We left it face down. Guardrails came next. She wrote an index card in neat block letters and read it aloud the way Rangers read a safety briefing. If contact occurs, route all messages to counsel. No in-person meetings without neutral location and witness. Topics limited to well-being, no paperwork exchanged, no signatures. I repeated the lines until they felt like a path in my mouth. She handed me the card. Carry it, she said. Use tone to do the heavy lifting. Back at the Adobe, I put structure where adrenaline had been. I changed the door code, swapped the mailbox lock, and wrote the confirmation numbers into the chain of custody with the same pressure I'd used to etch initials into wet concrete. Two-factor authentication went on every bank and email. Passwords rotated like tires before a long trip. I slid fresh batteries into both recorders, dated a strip of masking tape, and stuck it to each case. Small controls returned dignity to a house that had been asked to watch too much. I made a folder on the kitchen laptop labeled Public Narrative and fed it with PDFs, the full board feed link, the blogger's correction, the suspension text from the Colliers. I printed to paper and to a read-only drive, then set the drive in the metal cash box where I used to keep craft fair change. I wrote a line in the notebook. No public comment by choice, not absence. Choosing not to speak can be a sentence. Work steadied my hands the way a good ridge steadies your feet. The gallery delivery ticket sat under a magnet shaped like a trout. 3 mesquite stools wanted paper and twine. I wrapped each one in butcher paper, tied cotton rope around the legs, and tucked a business card in the knot, tape peeled with a clean sigh. The courier would arrive at 2. On the planner's margin, I wrote, almost without thinking, Craft Sustains Agency, and felt a small engine catch inside my chest. At noon, I drove to a church hall where a men's group for the over 60 meets in a carpeted room smelling faintly of lemon oil and old hymnals. We sat in a semicircle, knees like fence posts, and the facilitator rang a bell that didn't ring so much as declare the hour. Ground rules, confidentiality, no crosstalk, keep stories in the first person. When it was my turn, I said a paragraph about documents and boundaries and the way a daughter's voice can sound like a place you used to live. No one offered advice. One man touched the brim of his cap. Another said, I hear you. That was enough. We are not projects. We are weather reports. From there, I took the high road to Taos, the highway lifting and twisting like a ribbon pulled through a ring. At the veterans woodworking shop, the coordinator met me with a handshake that belonged to the old world. Firm, once, then done. The space was a tang of oak dust and hot steel, rows of hand planes shining in a case like tools in a chapel. We walked past benches scarred by useful mistakes. "We need someone 2 afternoons a week," she said. "Joinery basics. Tool care." My yes came out before my reasons lined up. Service that uses your hands tends to fix what your words cannot reach. On the drive back, my phone pinged with the sound I reserve for weather alerts. Lily's email had the length of a rainstorm. Remorse threaded with rationale, requests to meet threaded with requests to understand. I pulled over at a turnout, forwarded the message to Ava, and wrote the time into the notebook. Then I read the card aloud, the way you say a psalm to keep your feet moving. Route to council, neutral location and witness, topics limited, no paperwork, no signatures. The words sanded the edge off the heat. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and watched a hawk hang on a column of invisible air. Evening brought the house back to itself. I poured tea into Myra's cup and lifted the mallet handle I'd oiled yesterday. The grain had drunk its fill and lay quiet under the light, warm as a palm. I slid the index card under a magnet on the fridge door where grocery lists usually live. Boundaries should be visible and ordinary, not framed like relics. The door clicked shut with the satisfaction of a job done correctly at the right scale. At the table, I drafted a letter to the Forestry Scholarship Fund named in my will. Nothing fancy, just intention set in ink and a short note about honoring rangers who respected fire lines and the communities they protect. A signature in blue, the date, a second copy for the trust binder. Meaning belongs somewhere besides a courtroom. Dusk pressed its thumb into the horizon. I walked the road behind the house where the juniper breaks up the wind and the dirt keeps honest score of your footsteps. 3 things I saw: a moth stuttering against a porch light, a cloud stitched thin above the ridge, a coyote track soft in the dust. 2 things I heard: a screen door's spring, a far dog's single bark. 1 thing I felt: the belt buckle's cool circle against my waist. The grounding drill came back as practice, not emergency, like a hymn you hum because the tune is useful. When I returned, I wrote the last line of the day in the chain of custody: rebuild protocols active, service scheduled, boundaries visible. The sentence looked like a blueprint and a promise. I turned off the shop light and the room resolved into shapes I could navigate blind. The bench, the vise, the stacked lumber, the stool. Outside, somewhere beyond the adobe and the quiet road, other people were drafting their own versions of what had happened. Inside, my life had 4 good walls again and a roof that didn't need apology. Tomorrow, I'll teach someone how to square an edge. Tonight, I am content to know where mine are. The email arrived just after sunrise, a clean subject line from the state hospital that carried more mercy than most prayers. Cognitive assessment. Within normal limits. I opened the PDF and read with the steadiness you reserve for coordinates. Orientation intact, immediate and delayed recall intact, clock drawing normal, trail making A and B within expected range. The numbers spoke in a cool voice that did not need me to defend it. I printed 2 copies, slipped one into the trust binder behind a clear sleeve, and signed the chain of custody with time and file name. The laser printer's hum tapered into a hush that sounded like authority taking a seat. By mid-morning, I was at Ava's office. She greeted the report like a tool she'd been waiting to pick up. She stapled it to a brief memo that translated medicine into law and slid across a draft. A cease and desist addressing undue influence and any attempt to misrepresent my capacity. Strictly factual, she said, tapping the header. No adjectives, no thunder. She filed a notice with the Trust's counsel instructing that any guardianship petition be routed to her desk before a clerk could blink. A line tightened in my chest, not from fear, but from the way good rigging takes tension. On her monitor, a short press item scrolled by. Miles stepped away indefinitely. A Texas outlet linked the old civil case, adding the fresh shine of new attention. Ava did not look up from her keyboard when she said, "Observe, archive, do not gloat." I told her I wouldn't. Gloating is fuel for a different fire, and I'd already learned which ones not to feed. At home, the courier's truck dropped dust on the gravel and left a certified envelope in my box. Service of the cease and desist to Lily was confirmed by the tracking page before lunch. A second copy would go by certified mail in case the signature dance turned evasive. I logged both times, then gathered the extra copies of her childhood photos I had digitized. I placed them in a craft envelope and wrote, "Return if desired," in block letters that kept my hand honest. Tenderness costs nothing when you don't attach a hook. Late afternoon, tires whispered on the road and Lily stepped out, unannounced, into the heat shimmer. She stood on the gravel like someone who had misplaced a season. I held the doorway and the script at once. "Neutral location," I said evenly. "Witness present." Counsel looped. No paperwork, no signatures. It was almost all the words either of us spoke. I offered water. She shook her head. For a second, the wind lifted a strand of her hair and set it back where it belonged. Then she left. I wrote 2 lines in the chain of custody, time, subject, summary, and closed the book. A paragraph would have tried to heal what a paragraph cannot. Hank called at dusk, the sound of his truck window open and highway air in the line. "You did the hard part," he said, not bothering with hello. "Now don't do the dumb part." The laugh that came out of me caught me by surprise, short and useful. "Copy," I said. Friendship is ballast. You don't notice it until a crosswind tries to tilt you. The veteran's shop in the afternoon had smelled of oak dust and hot steel, the way purpose sometimes smells. I'd shown a younger vet how to cut a shoulder joint without bruising the tenon, his knuckles white on the chisel until the square finally turned true. The room breathed out as one when his piece fit snug. For an hour I forgot paper and phones, names stuck without effort, because they were attached to hands doing a thing that mattered. There are rooms where you are introduced as the guy who knows how to tune a plane, and that is enough. Back at the Adobe, the Scholarship Fund replied to my letter, board meeting next month, preliminary approval to create a small award in my name for rangers who respect fire lines and communities. I printed the email, slid it behind the will acknowledgement, and felt the ledger of meaning gain an entry. Numbers can bless, too, when they describe something you chose instead of something done to you. Ava's follow-up arrived with the precision I count on. Bureau credit freeze confirmations, deed recordation index numbers, and a calendar invite for a 6-month checkup. I copied the reference numbers by hand into the binder the way a man writes down trail junctions on foggy days, so memory has a friend when the view narrows. The binder closed with a tidy clap. Some victories deserve quiet. Evening took its slow seat on the porch. I poured tea into Myra's cup and let grief sit beside relief without competing for the armrest. I named privately what was gone for good. Holidays that will not feel light again. The easy habit of believing your child's smile means what you think it means. I named what did not need to return. Walking on eggshells. Explanations nobody asked for. Signing because a voice is warm. Naming shrinks echoes. The room inside my chest felt larger by an inch. I carried the craft envelope of Lily's photos to the mailbox and stood with the flag in my hand long enough to see the choice clearly. Not mailed, not trashed. I set it on the shelf by the door where important but not urgent things live. Spare keys, a flashlight, a map of the Pecos wilderness. Closure isn't a slam, it's a drawer, that slides as it should. The sun threw its last light on the Sangre de Cristo, until the ridge wore a thin band of copper. I opened the chain of custody on my knee and wrote the day's last line. Capacity affirmed, boundaries served, work scheduled, peace measurable. The words looked like coordinates, enough to find my way by if the weather turned. I closed the notebook, not my heart. Somewhere a nightbird made a sound I couldn't name. It didn't matter. I knew the shape of my roof against the sky and the weight of my house under my feet. Tomorrow I will show a man how to sharpen a chisel until it sings. Tonight I let quiet do its work, a craftsman's finish laid thin and true over the grain of a life that will hold. Late light poured across the mesquite tabletop the way it had the first day I smoothed it, a soft river of gold moving with the dust. I ran my palm along the grain and felt the honest truth of old flaws turned into figure. The house answered back with its ordinary chorus, the kettle's small complaint, the screen door's spring, a floorboard remembering every boot that had taught it patience. I opened the notebook near its last pages and wrote the date with the steadiness of a man signing for a package that bears no surprises. I made a quiet inventory without stacking trophies. The capacity report sits where it belongs, numbers that don't need me to apologize for them. The deed is recorded, the trust holds, freezes are in place, the blogger's correction sleeps in a folder labeled Public Narrative. None of it tastes like triumph. It feels like structure finally catching up to truth. There is still an ache, shaped like a porch seat I used to save for my daughter. I let the ache sit. It doesn't argue when I don't feed it. Earlier in the day, the veteran's shop sounded like work learning to call itself skill. A square joint seated with a click that made 3 men exhale at once. I handed out a single-page guide I'd typed the night before, how to tune a hand plane until the shaving lifts like ribbon. One of the younger vets slid the paper into his pocket like a ticket to some place that pays in sleep. Back home, the gallery invoice posted and a fresh commission came in by email. 6 stools, mesquite and walnut. Delivery in a month. My calendar took the weight of it and did not sag. Hank pulled up as the sun tipped toward copper and passed me a small bag of roasted green chilies through the truck window. "You good?" he asked. "Good enough," I said. He tapped the roof and drove on, a man who trusts nouns more than adverbs. Friendship can be as simple as hot peppers at the right hour. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the index card on the fridge, the one Ava printed in firm, readable letters, route to council, neutral location with witness, no paperwork, no signatures. I haven't needed it today. The card's presence does a kind of quiet parenting for the room. It reminds the house that love without edges becomes fuel, that boundaries are the frame that lets a fire warm without taking the roof. I've spent years mistaking appeasement for care. Turns out mercy burns cleaner when the wood is stacked right. If I could send a message back to the man I was 3 months ago, I'd keep it unromantic. Change the codes, freeze the credit. Find counsel who speaks in verbs. Copy your files twice, name them like coordinates, and keep a log even when you're sure you'll remember. Ask a witness to sit where they can see your hands. Tell the truth once to a room that can carry it, then let silence do its job. None of that makes you hard. It makes you accurate. As for Lily, I've learned to draw a narrow road that doesn't trespass. If she wants a path out of the person she became, it isn't through my kitchen alone. It looks like therapy that lasts longer than remorse, written amends sent through counsel instead of breathless doorsteps, and a monthly donation, whatever she can manage, to a nonprofit that protects elders from the kind of paperwork that nearly turned me into collateral. None of this purchases reunion. It purchases light where there used to be a fog machine. I will not measure her steps. I will not turn my life into her scoreboard. On the table sits a draft blurb for the scholarship the board is set to name next month. 1 sentence long, for rangers who respect fire lines and the communities that live behind them. I read it once and set a paperweight on top. An old river rock Lily picked up when she was 5 and solemnly declared, "Good for keeping the wind out." Meaning is now an appointment on a calendar, not a wish you leave by the sink. I walk the house as if to bless it with accurate names. The porch seat that once waited like a rehearsal is open to neighbors, students, Hank, or me alone with a book. The lighter cam sleeps in a drawer. The small recorders are labeled and stored. Stewardship replaces surveillance the way dawn replaces a flashlight. In the shop, the mallet handle I oiled 2 nights ago has cured to a warm hum when my palm closes around it. Tools kept ready are a kind of kindness. There's one last reckoning a father owes himself, and I made it with the lights low. I keep the memories that feed, the trout too small to keep, the chalky knees, the off-key bedtime songs. I lay down the expectation of being needed. I forgive myself for the long season where I called appeasement love and let other people define the size of my life. Accountability without self-forgiveness curdles. I'd rather work with oak than sour milk. At the bench, I return to the tabletop that has been my confession and my catechism. A well-cut joint needs both pressure and release. Too tight, and you split what you meant to hold. Too loose, and the whole piece rattles itself apart. Boundaries and mercy, tenon and mortise. I laid one thin, honest coat of oil and watched the wood tell me who it had been all along. Twilight gathered, and the Sangre de Cristo caught its band of copper for the nightly ritual. I sat on the porch with Myra's cup and the notebook on my knee. Somewhere a coyote stitched one note into the open field. I wrote the final entry in a hand that did not shake. Dignity chosen. Lines held. Hands still know their work. The sentence looked like a good joint. True, square, enough. I closed the notebook and set it beside the cup. The story ends where the work continues. A small house on the edge of a high desert. A table that remembers the tree it was. A man who knows which fires to feed and which to watch from a safe, respectful distance. In the end, a simple truth stands taller than any scandal. Dignity is not something granted by others. It is a line we choose to hold. When trust fractures, it's tempting to chase apologies or rewrite the past. But peace rarely comes from convincing anyone. It comes from clear boundaries, clean records, and the quiet courage to start again. Love, without edges, turns into fuel for someone else's fire. Love, framed by self-respect, becomes warmth that doesn't burn the house down. What heals us is ordinary work done faithfully. The bill paid on time, the password changed, the notebook kept, the door code updated, the craft practiced until the hands remember themselves. Recovery isn't cinematic. It sounds like a kettle settling on the stove and the small click of a lock you control. It looks like teaching what you know, serving where you can, and letting meaning flow forward into people you may never meet. Justice can be public. Healing is usually local. If this story leaves anything behind, let it be a modest rule. Protect dignity first, love later. Tell the truth once, document what matters, and let silence do the rest. Forgiveness can arrive in its own season, but accountability should not be asked to wait. And when the day finally softens, measure your life not by who clapped, but by the steadiness of your own hands. Thank you for spending your time here. If these reflections resonated, share a thought in the comments. We learn from what moved you. Let us know where you're tuning in from and what line you're choosing to hold in your own life. And if you'd like more stories of resilience, hard-won wisdom, and quiet victories, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Your presence keeps this community alive. Your voice helps others feel less alone.